So it's been a pretty big week for Square Enix, one with their huge title coming up this year in Final Fantasy XVI. They had previews, interviews, a ton of information spilling out there online. And then we also had Luminous Productions, the studio, having their announcement that they were folding into Square Enix, basically disbanding the studio and seemingly sending different parts of the studio all over the company, probably wherever they're needed for different projects. And a lot of the blame for this has been put on Forspoken. And while I think that's part of it, I think something else has happened here that was kind of revealed quietly during the Final Fantasy XVI previews that I at least wanted to point out and go over here today. So if you guys enjoy the video, make sure you like it. And if you're new to the Spawn Wave Plus channel, make sure you subscribe down below. So first, let's just take a quick look here. Forspoken Studio Luminous Productions will be folded into Square Enix, pretty much ending the run of a studio that was officially formed in 2018, and 5 years later, a little more than 5 years, will be officially defunct. And originally, this studio was formed during the creation of Final Fantasy XV. It was a massive project for Square Enix, and they were using this Luminous engine, right, for the first time, outside of tech demos that they made to essentially show off what the engine is capable of in a very controlled environment. It wasn't something you were just going to start playing. It was something you'd watch and be like, wow, that's really cool. And here comes Final Fantasy XV, which didn't necessarily released glowing reviews across the board, especially when it comes to the tech side of things. They were mostly targeting next generation platforms then, that being the Xbox One and the PlayStation 4, and eventually it found its way to PC. But because the project was so large, different developers and engineers and everything were pulled in from across all the different business divisions. I think Division 2 was like the main one that they were coming from, but they basically came together and formed this entity that was then named Luminous Productions and even kind of moved out as its own external company. And I guess Square looked at the Luminous engine and said, we can do a lot with this, so let's not only make a game with it, let's do other forms of media, which I figure they were going to take a shot at the Final Fantasy Spirits Within sequel. No, well, basically they're probably going to use the engine for forms of cinema, series, whatever, right? Just outside of games. They changed their mind on that and then went all in seemingly on Forspoken, as that probably started development, like full-on development, close to when this studio was formed, that being their main project over the last, 4 or 5 years now. And then here we are full circle after Forspoken comes out. Not the best critically, obviously, and it seems like the sales probably not to where Square Enix wanted them, as we already know their expectations are incredibly lofty, which leaves Luminous Productions in a strange position, but then also the engine that Forspoken was created on with the Luminous engine. Obviously, we know now that Square Enix decided, you know what, this studio that we've created that was kind of weird as it is, or not common, I should say, for a Japanese company and publisher to create in the first place, outside of their internal studios, becoming kind of an external company. But they have to then figure out what to do with this engine and the studio. Well, they decided the studio, we're going to basically return them to internal divisions within Square, and the Luminous engine, really, who knows at this point? But as we know, Square has been searching for this engine that they can basically latch onto and not have to use Unreal Engine, for example, and pay the fees for Epic. And we know with Final Fantasy VII, the remake series, that's Unreal Engine. But if they had something that would have worked, they probably would have stuck with it like Luminous. And they've had to move projects like, Kingdom Hearts to that and everything, but that being Unreal. But I noticed something in these previews for Final Fantasy XVI that kind of caught my eye a bit and made me wonder if it explained why they decided to go this route with Luminous, and if really this is it for the Luminous engine. See, we can take a look over here. This was part of sort of the media run that they did with Final Fantasy XVI. All right, so this was from the preview that SkillUp did. He got to talk to developers and producers on the game for Final Fantasy XVI, and he had asked about the engine. He said, as an aside, I asked if this was running in the Luminous engine, and Square said no. I asked if it was Unreal, and they said no. I asked what it was, and they refused to say. So yeah, I guess that's something they'll talk about later. All right, so originally, there were thoughts that this was Unreal Engine 4, maybe 5, something there. And the reason, I had to go back and look exactly why we were coming to this conclusion. Well, back when they were doing a presentation, I believe to investors, they had mentioned that Final Fantasy XVI, or at that time, the next mainline Final Fantasy, I think as they called it, they were playing around with ideas of Unreal Engine, and they ended up using it for some projects, right? We just talked about Kingdom Hearts, we talked about Final Fantasy VII, the remake series, but it seems that Unreal Engine, with where they were at that time, wasn't able to get, as they say, the finer details and points for the game they were shooting for. And in order to do that, obviously we know they went to the Final Fantasy XIV team with Yoshi P now obviously leading the development and the production on the game, all these different things, sure. But what happened, apparently, is they decided to build out the Final Fantasy XIV engine, and that's kind of where we are now. They don't have a name for it, I guess. I know they have Crystal Tools, right, is what they call it, but that's for Final Fantasy XIV. There's a chance. I mean, you look at 16 and you look at 14, you put them next to each other, they don't look the same at all, right? 16 looks on a whole different level, as you would expect for a game of that caliber that's, well, much more current. I mean, 14's been around for a while, but also not necessarily reliant on being this MMORPG with people running all over the place in a very much living, breathing multiplayer world. But if they were able to take that engine and sort of morph it how they want, update it, and build it out to this point to where, I mean, you see Final Fantasy XVI, and then you see Forspoken. Final Fantasy XVI, by the way, will have a 60 FPS mode. Forspoken, while it had a performance mode, when that kicked in, it was not great visually on the PlayStation 5. To go a little further, though, it seems that Sony also worked in terms of development, especially on, I guess, the engineering side with the PS5, to work to build this game out. I assume that also means that they had worked on the engine, if it was Crystal Tools, and modified it to this point to where maybe Square's looking around and saying, originally, we wanted the Luminous engine to work, but now we've, I don't want to say accidentally built, but seemingly built a better engine out of Crystal Tools for Final Fantasy XIV, which 14 has been an incredibly successful venture for them. It didn't start that way, but it certainly evolved to that point. And if you have a lot of people behind that game who's working on 16, yeah, they probably would be more comfortable using that engine, and especially after seeing the success there and then maybe carrying it over with the lineage that they have and the experience, but then also bringing in some serious talent around things like the combat, and it looks like Final Fantasy XVI is setting up to be a big-time success for Square, and that's really no thanks to the Luminous engine. So I do believe at this time Square is cutting their losses with the Luminous engine and maybe attaching themselves to whatever they've built here for Final Fantasy XVI, and maybe that's what they'll continue to use and just keep updating it as they go forward to the next mainline Final Fantasy game and so on there. But I will say, we have to get this game in our hands, and obviously there'll be a ton, I'm sure, of tech analysis from places like Digital Foundry, and hey, we'll have a chance to compare a game on the Luminous engine in 2023 with Forspoken to a game in Crystal Tools ++ or something in 2023 with Final Fantasy XVI. But that's kind of what I think happened here. I believe at this time, Luminous Productions, as they have done, folding into Square, and it seems like they are basically disbanding back to where they were 5 or 6 years ago, I guess, at this time. But let me know what you guys think about this one down below. Is this really the end of the Luminous engine? And does a lot of it have to do with them discovering maybe a better engine they can apply in the future with Final Fantasy XVI? Thanks, guys, for watching, and I'll see you next time.